Kim and I have been friends for several years now. We've worked together on the Council for Pacific and Asian American Ministries in the Reformed Church in America. And now we're both serving on this commission for race and ethnicity for the past 3 years or so. And well, I'm here to share my story. I came up with a title yesterday. I called it From Racism to Repentance and Reconciliation, my story as a Japanese American Christian.
Yeah.
So let me start out to tell you a little bit about, who I am, where I'm from.
Usually the guest speaker, you may start with a prayer.
Oh, okay. Well, that sounds
or
good.
if you don't want it, you may go
Oh,
like
okay.
that.
All right.
Yeah,
This is
we
my
love
first time at the meeting.
we
so
love to pray together, yeah.
Yes. Do you want to pray?
Yeah, you
Oh, me.
Yeah, right, okay.
All right. Well, dear Lord, Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you and praise you for this opportunity to share a word with the folks here. And I really hope that the things I have to say will glorify and Father. I pray for your Holy Spirit to inspire me and guide me. And may this be a good time of fellowship and friendship. We ask in Jesus' name.
Amen.
I was born in 1950 in Chicago, Illinois. And I'm what they call Sansei, third generation Japanese American. And that means that my grandparents are Issei, first generation. They came from Japan.
2세, 3세. Oh, I see.
Yeah, like
All right.
Ichi, Ni, San,
Yeah, right, okay.
it's like
Yeah,
1, 2,
yeah,
3,
okay.
right? I mean, that's all the Japanese I know. But anyway, my grandparents came from Japan. My mother's side of the family came from Hiroshima, and my grandfather was a Japanese businessman. They had a little Oriental gift shop. And on my father's side, they came from Chiba Prefecture, which I understand is like a suburb of Tokyo. And my grandfather was a Baptist minister, and he had a Japanese church in Sacramento, California. And my grandmother was also Christian coming from Japan. I think they came from a family of doctors. And that's unusual, because I think back then and even now, it's just like less than 1% of Japanese in Japan are Christian. But a lot of times when they came to the United States, they did become Christian because like sometimes the churches would have English classes and they would teach from the Bible, and these Japanese people wanted to learn English so that they would be introduced to the Bible that way. And another thing, the churches, I think, offer some social services, help them to get jobs or, find out food and doctors and stuff like that. So a lot of Japanese, when they came to the United States, they became Christian. And I think that's probably what happened to my grandparents. But the biggest thing for the Japanese in America happened in World War II. As you know, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, and after that, FDR said, this is a day of infamy. We can't trust those Japanese people. We've got to put them all into internment camps. And so my parents were college age at the time. They were sent to internment camps, and so were my grandparents. And all my aunts and uncles went to these Japanese internment camps.
Where is it?
Well, I think there were like 10 or 11 camps, and they were out in the desert, these remote places where they couldn't cause any trouble, or they were Hart Mountain in Wyoming. I mean, there's just really deserted places, and they would build these army barracks for people, and it was very harsh living conditions. And even though we say, the land of the free, home of the brave, it was like they had no civil rights. There was no trial. They never found any spies, but they were all forced to go into internment camps. So, I was not born at the time, but I was still greatly affected by the camps, because even when my parents came out of camps, they carried the shame of the camps with them. My mother said when she left camp, they told her, forget Japan, be as American as possible. And so, when I was born, it's like they didn't give me a Japanese name. It was Geraldine Ruth. And it was like they were trying so hard to be super American. And when I was growing up, we never lived around other Japanese. Some Japanese went back to the West Coast after the war. But a lot of Japanese said, well, they had such a terrible experience out there, they didn't want to go back. And that was my parents. So I was born in Chicago, and I moved a lot growing up. I lived in Richmond, Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C., 2 places in Pennsylvania. Then I graduated high school in Tennessee, and went to college in Atlanta. So I didn't have any Japanese friends. I never learned to speak Japanese. My parents only spoke English in the home. And when I was growing up, when people say, "What are you?" You're like, "Are you a vegetable or a fruit or something?" I go, "Well, I am Japanese American. I am American. I am not Japanese." And I didn't want to learn to speak Japanese. And I knew nothing about the history and culture. It's just like, you know, I wanted to fit in with all my friends at school, who were usually mostly white. And, you know, I really rejected that Japanese part of me. And because we moved around so much, I was always like the new kid at school. And, you know, a new kid in school gets teased a little bit, but like for me it was always a racial thing. It's like, "You're a Jap, you're a Chink, look at your slanty eyes and your flat pancake face." And so I grew up feeling very ashamed of being Japanese. And I remember in the 5th grade I came home crying to my mother because, you know, they were teasing me again. And I remember my mother said to me, she said, "Jerry, you just have to work hard in school. You have to prove that you're better than they are." And so that's what I did. I mean, I was like the model Asian student. I studied really hard and tried to make good grades. And but the thing is, and I realize now as an adult, well, my mother meant well. I mean, she didn't know what else to say. But it was kind of the lie in all that, is that it was like, I had to prove that I was better than everybody else. All the white kids in class, I mean, they could be dumb, they could be silly, they could be rude or whatever, but they were basically acceptable. I was never acceptable. Even no matter how hard I tried, I could never be like them. And so it's like, when I was growing up, I really hated being Japanese. I mean, I wanted to be white. I wanted to have white skin. I wanted to have blonde hair and blue eyes. I mean, that was my dream. So I wanted to be a white person. And I didn't like being Japanese at all. So, well, I should also mention, you know, my grandfather was a Baptist minister, and my father started out as a Baptist minister, and one of the first places we moved was Richmond, Virginia, and he was teaching at a seminary there, and it was an all-black school. It was a historically black school, and I think my father was probably the first Asian professor they had there. I think nobody else would hire him after the war, and at that time in Richmond, Virginia, in the 1950s, everything was segregated. So he taught in an all-black school. We lived in the colored side of town, so all the neighbors were black. But when I started school, you know, Japanese, like other Asians, felt like education was very important. So my father goes to the school superintendent and says, "Well, where's my daughter going to go to school?" And so the superintendent looks and says, "Well, you know, when my parents registered to vote in the state of Virginia, you could check off you're white or you're Negro." And they had no box for Hispanic or Latino or Asian or Pacific Islander. So he said, well, they looked at us, like, obviously we weren't black, so they said, "Okay, we'll let you pass for white. And your daughter can go to an all-white school." So every morning, my father would get up, I'd get in the car, he'd drive me all the way to the other side of town so I could go to an all-white school. And my mother said to me, "You know, Jerry, your friends in school are never going to come visit you for a play date at home," because we lived in the colored side of town. So I had my white friends at school, and I had my black friends in the neighborhood. I mean, it was very strange. It was like we just didn't fit in anywhere. And, you know, and that's how it was in the South in the 50s. So, like I said, we moved around to a lot of different places. So when I was about, my last 2 years of high school was in Sewanee, Tennessee. So this is, again, back in the Deep South. But this time, my father was teaching at an all-white Episcopal Seminary in Sewanee, Tennessee. So now we're on the different side of the color line. And I remember I joined the youth group at church, and we went on a picnic. And they told all the girls, you know, bring food to share for the picnic. And so my mother cooks up chicken teriyaki. So, okay, I got something. So I get to the picnic, and all the other girls bring Southern fried chicken. And I looked, and I'm looking at my chicken teriyaki, and I threw it in the bushes. So I was so ashamed. You know, I wanted so badly to be accepted by all the white kids. And this is like maybe 1966. And back then, you know, people, now they say, oh, I love sushi, right? You know, not then, not in the South. You know, it's like they'd never heard of sushi or sukiyaki or chicken teriyaki. So I was so ashamed. I threw it away, and I was kind of like angry at my mother. It's like, no, you let me down. You could even peanut butter jelly sandwiches would be better than chicken teriyaki, you know. But I mean, this is, you know, the struggle I had growing up. It was that I just felt so out of place. And I wanted so badly to fit in with the other children, but it was just like, because of my face, it's just like, I was never going to be accepted as an equal with them. So, and I went to college at Emory University in Atlanta, and at that time it was pretty much an all-white school. I'm trying to think, there's like maybe 4 other Asian American students in the undergraduate school. I mean, now you go to college campuses and it's like, oh, 15, 20% Asian Americans, because we're so smart, right? But back then, there's like maybe 4 or 5 of us on campus. The other Asian students were in the graduate schools. They were the foreign students. And, you know, I didn't particularly identify with them either. And so I decided to be an English major because I wanted to be sure everybody knew I speak good English. I am not from Japan. I don't have those funny accent, you know. So I was trying so hard to be white. And, you know, I had a white boyfriend and all this kind of stuff. And I just didn't have much sense for being Japanese. But what actually brought me into, you're finally beginning to accept being Japanese was that I started to get interested in acting. As an English major, I had this one professor who was teaching a drama class. And I came in to talk to him about a term paper I was writing. And all of a sudden he goes, he was a theater director. He goes, Jerry, I have a role for you. Me? I said, wow, what is it? And he said, it's a bombing victim of Nagasaki. My face fell. Like, well, that did not sound glamorous at all. So I said, excuse me, but isn't that kind of a racist thing? Is that kind of stereotyping? And the director said to me, he said, well, who else do you expect me to have play this role? I go, okay, I guess you can't have a black person in this role. I said, well, okay. And what happened was, well, he ended up being fired from Emory because he was too political. This is like 1970s when, you know, the students were all rioting on campus for anti-Vietnam and Kent State, and this director is too liberal for this very conservative Southern college. They fired him. He started his own theater company. And about 2-3 years after I graduated, he called me up and said, Jerry, I want to do your play. I said, okay, oh boy, I'm really excited. And all it was just a little 5-minute monologue, like a little solo speech. And he directed me how to do it. And so I get on stage, and it's like, okay, I did my little thing. And then, but the funny thing is, like, when the newspapers came to see it, I guess because I was kind of exotic, they put my picture in the newspaper, and they said nice things about me in the review. And I go, oh wow, this is the first time I've actually been affirmed for being Japanese. They're just like, okay, now I'm glad I'm Japanese because I got some positive attention. And then a year later, a different theater company called me up and said, Jerry, somebody from our company saw you in this play, and we're doing a play about a Vietnam vet, and he has a Vietnamese girlfriend. Would you come and audition for this? I go, oh, okay, I don't know how to audition, but I'll come down. And what it was, in the play, this Vietnamese girl is like just a ghost in the play, so she just walks back and forth. But I got my picture on the poster, you know, and it's just like, again, this is like positive attention, so I'm feeling pretty good about being Asian at this point. And this led me in 1979 to move to New York City to pursue a career in acting. And when I came to New York City, this is the first time I started to meet other Asian American actors. And they would talk about their experiences growing up in school and stuff like that. I go, wow, that's what happened to me. You know, it was just like, it was just so nice that there were other people who had the same experience. Because like I said, when I was growing up, I never had any Japanese or Asian friends. And so when I came to New York City, it was like, finally, I'm meeting some others who had a similar experience to me. So this was like a beginning of me feeling some sense of pride in being Japanese. And then one of the plays I did with Pan-Asian Repertory Theater, this was, I don't know if you remember, but there was a time when finally, about 40 years after the war, the Japanese said, okay, we demand justice. What you guys did to us was not fair. That was not right. Putting all the Japanese, and a lot of them were American citizens, they're all, and so they went through this whole process of a court appeal, they testified in front of Congress, and because of that, the Pan-Asian Repertory Theater did some Japanese internment camp plays, and I was able to be in one of them. So then finally, I got interested in reading about the camps, and I go, oh my goodness, this is what my parents experienced, because when my parents got out of the camps, they were so ashamed. They didn't want to talk about the camps, they just wanted to forget it. And when we saw my relatives, they would talk about the camps, but they would just talk about the good things. They would laugh, and I would think, well, these camps must have been like summer camp or something. I mean, I had no idea what they went through, and I wasn't particularly interested. But when I did the play, then I did some research, go, oh my goodness, I can't believe what my parents had to go through. And in fact, right now, there's a play on Broadway called Allegiance that George Takei, who used to be on Star Trek, is starring in it. And it's probably going to close next week, because whatever. But we went to see that play, my husband and I, and she's like, oh, I cried through the whole thing. It was like, well, that's my story. That's the story of my parents is in that play. And for such a long time, it's not been recognized by the general American public. I mean, I think most textbooks don't say much about the internment camps. What they do is just a line or two, because, I mean, this is a real blot on American history, that they took American citizens and locked them up in prison camps with no trial. It was just pure racial prejudice. So that was, you know, part of my coming to terms with being Japanese American was through my acting. But we're also here about to talk about my Christian experiences, and so I wanted to mention that you know, my father was a minister. He started out as a Baptist minister, then he converted to the Episcopal Church. And at first I was really good with that. You know, I went to church every Sunday. I went to Sunday school. I was in the choir. I went to church camp. I was very obedient, good preacher's kid. But then I got to be a teenager, and then I started getting a little bit rebellious. It's just like, I'm so tired of being little Miss Goody Two-Shoes. And when you're the pastor's kid, everybody in the church is looking at you, and you know, you have to be super good, because otherwise your dad was bad. So in high school and then in college, I got to be really kind of angry and rebellious. It's like, well, I don't want to go to church anymore. And I really rejected you know, what my parents taught me. And again, this was in the late 60s, early 70s, when everybody on college campuses were protesting, and you know, they were against the establishment. So I thought, well, I'm just, you know, going along with the tide kind of thing. And so I was doing theater. I also, for a while, got really involved in, you know, all these new age kind of religions like yoga and transcendental meditation and all this kind of stuff. Because I think I had a spiritual hunger inside of myself, but I was rejecting all this stuff that my parents forced me to do for such a long time. I wanted to find out things for myself. And so I stopped going to church, and almost like acting became kind of more of a religion for me for the longest time. And so, you know, how did I get back to the church was like, I met my husband at the Pan Asian Repertory Theater. He's also Japanese American. And he had actually gone to Princeton Seminary. He was studying to be a minister, and then, I don't know, he got disillusioned and got into the acting business instead. And he didn't bother going to church either. And so, so when I was 35, I had my first child. And after he was born, I was really excited. I called up my dad. I go, Dad, you know, you're your grandfather. And when my father said, he said, I would like the privilege of baptizing my first grandson. So, hey, sure, sounds great to me. And we set a date in May. And then for Easter, I called up my father. They were living in Maine at the time. I said, you know, hi, Dad, happy Easter. And my father goes, well, Jerry, did you and Peter go to church today? Church? I haven't been to church in 10, 15 years. I said, no. My father got so mad, he hung up. Now, this is the day before email, so he couldn't email me, but he was a typewriter, he typed a letter, Dear Jerry, I expect all my baptismal candidates to go to church every Sunday before the baptism. So he even written me the riot act. So I look at Peter, I go, well, Peter, you know, we got to make my dad happy, so what are we going to do? And, you know, there's a lot of churches in New York City. We just have to go for a few weeks. I said, well, I remember that there was this Japanese church on 7th Avenue, and I'd gone there for some social activity. I said, okay, if we have to go to church for a few weeks, let's just check out this little Japanese church. And so we show up at the Japanese American church. It's on 7th Avenue and 24th Street. And the funniest thing happened. I started meeting people who knew my family. Like the minister's wife said, what's your maiden name? And I go, Igarashi. And she said, well, that's kind of an unusual Japanese name. She had lived in LA before coming to New York City. She said, I used to have a piano student named Kenny Igarashi. I go, that's my cousin. You know, she knew my cousin. And then another little old lady met me. She said, what's your mother's maiden name? And I go, Kimikato. And she said, I knew your mother at UC Berkeley. You know, we were roommates, and I haven't seen her in 40 years since the camp. I go, I can't believe it. So I called my mother, you know, your old college roommate is here. And, and another woman said, oh, she went to my grandfather's Japanese church in Sacramento. She used to teach Sunday school there. She knew my parents as little kids. And so it's like, you know, we stayed at a church. And because I remember when I grew up, I didn't have any Japanese friends. And when I started having children, it's like, well, I want my children to grow up around other Japanese people. You know, I wanted them to have some sense of community and identity that I didn't have, you know. So we started going back to church, and then I started teaching Sunday school and getting involved in all these other activities. And then what happened was that, you know, 9/11 happened, and our church is not that far from you know, Wall Street area. And our minister at the time, Reverend Nathan Brownell, went running down to the World Trade Center. He was trying to help out. And afterwards, you know, both denominations wanted to help our church. And the Reformed Church in America sent a work team from Iowa to help fix up our church. And these are big white farmer type people who know how to, you know, fix the ceiling and plumbing. You know, here in New York, we're all business type people, and we don't know how to fix anything. But these people from Iowa, you know, they're really hands-on kind of people. And so they sent a work team of about 20 people to our church 2 years in a row. And I'm looking, he says, oh my goodness, these white people, you know, they spend their time and their money to come to our church to help us. And I was really touched. And so the third year, they invited some people from our church to go back to Iowa to thank the congregation for helping out our church. And so there were about, I don't know, 7 or 8 of us who went on the plane. And I was serving on the board director at the time. I said, Jerry, why don't you make a speech? Because you speak such good English. You know, most people at our church are from Japan, and they've got heavy accents, and they're very shy. And so you're an actor, you can make a speech. Okay. So I get up there, and I'm shaking like crazy, because our church is rather small. There's only about, you know, 60, 70 people at the most. This is a huge church with, like, you could see like 500, 600 people. And I'm just shaking like crazy, but I'm thanking them that they came to our church. And the work team on their hands and knees. They were cleaning the floor and fixing things. I mean, I was really deeply touched. And it kind of healed something in my heart that all these years I've been carrying on such hatred for white people because they treated me so meanly when I was a kid. And after the service, we're standing outside, we're shaking people's hands as they go by. And this one kind of elderly gentleman comes up and he says, I was a soldier during World War II. And and all of a sudden I could kind of see him. I mean, now he's an old man, he's with a cane. And I said, oh my goodness. He probably went off to fight the war. He's probably 18 or 20. He was just a farm kid from Iowa. He probably did, maybe felt really patriotic. But he didn't go off to war meaning to hate Japanese people. I mean, war is war, and you do what you have to do in order to fight in a war. And I just, in that moment, I realized that, I was wrong to hate all these white Americans all these years. I realized in that moment that I needed to forgive him, and I needed to ask forgiveness for myself, because even though I felt like I was the victim of racial prejudice and hatred, that still, I had to forgive. And I think it's kind of a way of, releasing, the bitterness and anger and resentment I held all those years. And it also made me realize that, like the Bible says, judge not lest ye be judged. Or, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. And it really is. It's not up to us to try and right all the social ills or whatever, at least within our personal lives. It's just like, really forgiveness is the key to all that. And I felt such a lifting of a burden. I mean, all these years I've been a prisoner of all this racial hatred and prejudice, but in that moment, when I repented, then I felt healing and reconciliation. And then a tremendous sense of gratitude for God for allowing me to go through all these experiences. And then, so after that experience in Iowa, then I started to get more involved with the Reformed Church in America, and I started serving on things like the Council for Asian Pacific Ministries, the Commission for Race and Ethnicity. I've been asked to serve on a white privilege task force, and been to leadership training for multiracial leaders. And it made me realize that, God was preparing me all through my life. All these miserable experiences I had as a child gave me greater sensitivity and urgency to work on those issues within the church. Because I think the Reformed Church in America, they used to be called the Dutch Reformed Church, and it's been a predominantly white denomination for much of its history, and they're really struggling to become more diverse and multiracial. It's like, they need people like me to speak up and to participate and help them understand what is the minority experience from my point of view. So I really felt like, God allowed me to go through all those, really trials and tribulations, because He's wanted to use those experiences now to help other people. So I really feel like, like Joseph in the Bible, when he says, what others meant for evil, God meant for good. I mean, it took me a long time to get there, but it's like all those kids teasing me in the playground, all those people, whatever, it gave me, the experiences that I can now use in serving this church. So, how are we doing on time?
It's fine. Yeah. It's
Okay.
Still 1:15, so you have, I think, five minutes more than a week. I want to share with the members the question and whatever comments.
Yeah. I think that's probably enough.
Yeah, right. You may have one more the chance to. I think it's better. It's good for us to talk together. So, any question, comment? I don't want to say a donation, but right.
Why don't you have the talk over the sandwich?
Yeah.
Just say time.
Oh, sandwich?
yes.
Yeah, right, okay. Let's have a sandwich
Okay, let's
together,
eat.
then we sit around and free